Joining me for another True North Talk is one of the great speakers of this fantastic event we've been covering here, Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, thank you so much for being here and also for being here for this interview. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
One of the big things that I thought people needed to take away from your remarks, and I know you've written about it as well, is this idea of Islamophobia and how it's been weaponized. And I was wondering if you could speak to the fact that this term is not the morally virtuous one that it's often presented by, because from your perspective as not just an academic and as a writer, but your perspective as a Muslim woman, I think this is very critical.
So it's a very important question, particularly now in the wake of Christchurch, where this atrocity has occurred, which was certainly a lethal and diabolical act of anti-Muslim xenophobia. Every decent person will condemn it, every democracy will prosecute it, and there will be sentencing of the individual that perpetrated it. That is anti-Muslim xenophobia. It is being portrayed and amalgamated with the idea of Islamophobia, and that's dangerous. So Islamophobia, you will find no evidence of it in the Quran or in any of the related literature or scriptures. It really didn't emerge in the mainstream until post-revolutionary Iran. About 10 years after the Iranian Revolution, the first act citing Islamophobia was Ayatollah Khomeini sentencing Salman Rushdie, the author of the Satanic Verses, to death. That was based on a charge of Islamophobia. He was deemed eligible for execution, and that's why there were death threats on his life. He was in hiding for many years. His translators were murdered, booksellers were burned, and that brought to the world the idea of Islamophobia. Now, post-revolutionary Iran is really an Islamist pseudo-democracy. It embraces not Islam, but a false imposture of Islam, the totalitarian, Marxist-influenced ideology that was really birthed in Egyptian prisons. That relies on denying any possibility of scrutinizing its ideas, its institutions, its ideologues. Islamism shirks or shies away from any kind of scrutiny. And what Iran has done, together with other key states in the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, together with Iran spearheads it, with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and other states, they've been passing many, many resolutions for about 10 years, which are non-binding in the United Nations, to deem Islamophobia a crime. Their goal is to deem it a crime against human rights. So effectively, having a conversation we did this afternoon would one day become a human rights violation. Those resolutions were stopped when Governor Salman of Pakistan was assassinated. We're privileged to have one of his sons here in the room today. So Salman was considered, a good way to describe him for your viewers, is the Rupert Murdoch of Pakistan. Incredibly erudite, urbane, tremendous icon of progressive ideas, beloved by students and the public. And he was horrified at the conviction of Asia Bibi, the Christian woman who was a peasant, unfortunately, falsely charged with blasphemy in Pakistan and would spend over a decade in jail on false pretenses. As a Muslim and a governor of Punjab, the most powerful, powerful position in Pakistan, one of the most powerful, he stood up for her and said, these blasphemy laws that you're using to convict her are false and they're un-Islamic and they need to be repealed. He did that as a Muslim with a conscience, and he was deemed Islamophobic, and he was assassinated with 27 bullets in the middle of the day after eating lunch by his own detail. His security detail, right after pumping him full with bullets, put down his weapon and said, I have defended Islam, and he became a national hero. At his indictment, he was met with Pakistani lawyers who threw rose petals on him in the courtroom. That is what Islamophobia does. It results in the death of a Muslim governor who was defending the rights of a Christian woman on the basis of his Islamic conscience, which he knew it was unjust. But you do not get to challenge Islamism. And it's not just Muslims who've been executed on the basis of Islamophobia. The only Christian cabinet minister, Shahbaz Bhatti, was also executed outside his mother's home in Pakistan for the same thing, trying to repeal blasphemy laws. Just an aside, Islam proper, the Quran, explains that if there is such a crime as blasphemy, it's not even clear that it is a crime, blasphemy being to deny the existence of God, for instance, might be one example of blasphemy. It is a crime not to be judged by mortals, but between the maker and the human being. So it's not even a crime that human beings are supposed to prosecute. So all those leaders, whether they're the leaders of Iran or the leaders of Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, for instance, imprisoning Raif Badawi, whose wife is here with us this afternoon, on the basis of blasphemy, are making the ultimate criminal act in Islam. They're equating themselves to the maker. So now, coming back to America, Americans are grief-stricken at seeing the plight in New Zealand. Imagine, God forbid, that happened in an American mosque. We would all be devastated. That is not an act of Islamophobia. Now, why does it matter words? Because those that control the words control the narrative. And before the sun had set on these attacks in New Zealand, we had the godfather of Islamism, Muslim Brotherhood ideologue, Recep Erdogan, the president of Turkey, already campaigning with his supporters, asking them to see the live feed of the gunmen, to know how the West treats Muslims, how the West commits genocidal acts on Muslims. Why would he do that? Because as an Islamist, he's looking to fragment populations. He wants to separate Muslims from the secular world. The Islamist is at war with secularism, at permanent war with secularism. This, of course, if we think about Salman Rushdie, we come all the way to January 2015, where the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists were also executed on the same basis. I'd never seen the magazine. The cartoons are obscene, in my opinion. They defame Jesus, but they did not deserve to be executed for it. When we choose to live in secular pluralism, we choose to live alongside profanity. That's fine. We don't have to consume it. But for the Islamists, this is a legitimate basis for war. And these ideas now, when I'm hearing about some kind of legislation you mentioned in Canada,
yes.
These ideas, if they enter into law in the United States or in Canada or in Britain, this not only limits our freedom of speech, which is precious to Canadians and Americans alike and British, but it runs the risk of enabling and empowering Islamist positions. Now, it sounds very exotic. If you're a Canadian sitting on your homestead, or if you're an American, going to a ball game, it sounds completely irrelevant. But we have in Canada 7 parliamentarians who are Islamists already elected, and they control the debate when, for instance, a Canadian woman refuses to lift her niqab when taking the oath for becoming a Canadian citizen. She did not want to reveal her face, and this set a huge, enormous struggle inside Parliament, which most parliamentarians are not equipped to deal with because they don't understand the difference between Islam and Islamism. When we amalgamate Islamophobia with anti-Muslim xenophobia, when we amalgamate Islam with Islamism, it benefits only Islamists, Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, ISIS. That's Islamism. When we amalgamate those things, it only denies rights to Christians, non-Muslims, pluralist Muslims like me, minorities, atheists. It is the most profound anti-democratic act in order to give legal teeth to the concept of Islamophobia. So it does threaten the stability of secular plural democracy.
And when we see that motion that was passed by the Democrats in the House in the United States, and the Canadian motion you reference, M103, which called for, quote, a whole of government approach, unquote, to combat Islamophobia. They use the word Islamophobia, but they don't define it. These acts are presented by supporters as being benign. And this was one of the things that we saw in Canada, where the legislators that were advocating this said, oh, no, it's just non-binding, it's symbolic. Well, then why is it so essential? Why is it so important? And there's a hypocrisy there, because advocates of these types of things I've seen often want to pretend that it's doing nothing. It's just about words, when, as you know, well, those words are very important. And I'm wondering how we break through that, because the situations you describe in Pakistan and Turkey, where Islamophobia is a very real word that has the clout of the law behind it, whereas when it's brought up in the West, it's typically in this very detached, secular, Ivy Tower, liberal way of, oh, no, it's just about being nice and compassionate. And some people are well-meaning, others are not.
Right, so this is a wonderful question, and it's not one that I've been asked before, so I'll be thinking aloud. I think there are a few concepts that are of great concern. First of all, I see less and less that is benign about the liberal mindset in the United States, and I'm a registered independent. What I see is that there is a lionization of victimhood happening in the popular culture, There was a brilliant article written in The Atlantic called About Victimhood Chic, in the wake of an actor who simulated his own hate crime and now faces 16 felony charges. So there's this enamorment of being a victim. You might remember the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of these purported crimes. And everyone's basis was, I believe, pristine, and that apparently is the basis of our justice system. Total disgrace. So there's this overemphasis on the victim. That I think immediately blinds people. Not that there are not real victims, but that's very troubling. Then there is this false narrative projected and portrayed by Islamists in America that they are victims, which is very hard for me to swallow because I've been a Muslim in America for almost 2 decades at this stage. And Muslims in America have more religious freedom, more freedom to proselytize, more freedom to move upwardly mobile, fastest track to becoming a 6-figure income than almost any other immigrants that come there. So I don't know how that equates to victimhood in the United States. Now I see this embrace of victimhood chic, false narrative of Muslims being victims, propagated by Islamists, embraced by the left. Now the left, the democratic left appears to be losing a lot of its original strengths. I don't know, out of fear or out of necessity, they've embraced an extremely far left bastion of up-and-coming Congress people who have allied with Islamists. And this is a well-known red-green alliance, an unholy alliance between Islamists who portray themselves in the West as victims. Well, victims is something that far-left people can relate to. They must be sheltered from God knows what, but presumably sheltered from the secular democracy that elevated those victims to be at a point where they have a political power or political voice, unlike the Muslim majority countries they come from. So this marriage between the two now becomes very potent in the public imagination. There are very few American independents, American conservatives who truly understand Islamism. Remember, I'm immersed in this because I talk about this every week and write about it every week. So very few of them understand it. They understand the hypocrisy of the left and they understand victimhood chic. They don't see how the Muslim Brotherhood is using this. So coming back to the resolution that took our breath away in the United States, I think it's House Resolution 183, I could be wrong about that. This followed the vitriolic and explicit anti-Semitic remarks and actions of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, which date back to at least 2012. Even before she entered the political race, the local Jewish community had approached her expressing concern about some of her ideas and some of her words. She talked about her re-education then. She gets into Congress and she immediately does it again with horrible images that we won't repeat. Yes. Horrible words that demonize the entire country, the country of Israel, which, by the way, offers more religious plurality to Muslims than any other country in the Middle East, including my home, Pakistan. So that's one. Number two is her actions, which have been little discussed in the mainstream media. Fundraising for Islamic relief, which has been sanctioned by 3 Muslim countries, including Tunisia and Bangladesh, that do not want Islamic relief anywhere near Rohingya Muslims in case they end up radicalized, because they recognize Islamic relief is a vector for monies to groups like Hamas. Yeah. Sweden has also similarly sanctioned them. She keynotes with them as a member of Congress. And then what I needed to mention earlier and slipped my mind is her affiliation with the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. A lot of the left on American universities and American campuses, their whole contact with the idea of Israel is through the lens of BDS, which is nothing more than a militant anti-Semitic movement masquerading as a human rights organization. Boycott, divestment, sanction isn't really seeking the boycott of Israel. Otherwise, no one in America would be using an iPhone. All that technology, much of it is birthed in Israel. They are actually looking for the denormalization, delegitimization, and eradication of Israel. Eradication through rights of permanent return for generational refugees. No other refugees in the world have this right. So if they advocate that, they're advocating for the eradication of Israel. And she is a supporter of that. And she's also a hypocrite because she lied to the local people of Minneapolis that she was not, and immediately went in and then was opposed to an anti-BDS bill. This is how Islamists operate. They gain great currency if they are appearing like a minority. Islamists are seeking to be treated like a minority religion. They are not a minority religion. I have a great difficulty recognizing Muslims to be a minority religion because I'm one of 1.67 billion. That aside, most of us don't live in America, so I understand that. But there is nothing about a totalitarian ideology that privileges it as a minority religion. Until Americans recognize that Islamists, they might be Muslim, they might have African coloring, they might come from a foreign country, they might wear a headdress. This is not about their personhood, this is about their ideas. If we quote Salman Rushdie, ideas are not people. We can attack ideas, and should be, with other ideas. Until we drop that veil, America is going to be at the mercy of Islamists who are going to corral the left narrative and then pursue all kinds of further empowerment. Right now it's in a House resolution. 2-3 steps, maybe they're going to enact a bill and pass a law. And then you and I can't talk like this.
Well, and that's why the Islamophobia discussion is so important, because this is an idea that tries to limit the scope of ideas. I mean, it's a push that tries to say, no, 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 you can't say that. And you're right that when it starts as a non-binding resolution or motion, that is always the precursor to something else down the road. And I guess the question I'd ask is the politicians that aren't Muslims, that aren't Islamists, that genuinely want to do well, and they're drinking that Kool-Aid of we've all got to, link arms and sing John Lennon's Imagine, and we've got to make the world a better place. How do you break through to those people that are genuinely trying to fight racism and bigotry, but are falling for Islamophobia? Because the loudest voices are from people that look like their intentions are pure.
So maybe they need more introductions to the outcomes of Islamism. Earlier on today, unfortunately I didn't get to speak to them. There was a family of Yazidi survivors. I work with Yazidi people in Kurdistan, and I'm very honored to do so. And I encountered survivors of ISIS enslavement, ISIS marriages, women that are still kidnapped into ISIS now. We think there are more than 3,000 or maybe 3,800 that are still missing. Families that have paid ransom. We can meet those. We can meet people like Malala Yousafzai, who was attempted to be silenced by Islamists, by the Taliban. The family of Salman Taseer, the family of Raif Badawi. These are the victims of Islamism. These are who the Democratic Party in America and the Republican Party in America should be standing strongly with. I think that's part of it. And another is there has to be a degree of fearlessness. If you look at Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and unfortunately I've had to look at lots of things that she said, underneath her there's this steeliness, there's this complete lack of shame. Imagine saying something anti-Semitic, which I can't to begin with, but imagine saying it shamelessly, defending it, and having absolutely no compunction in standing by those remarks and twisting a resolution to protect your ability to say those things again. We have to have that kind of robustness and fearlessness to confront that. We can't shy away because we're afraid of being called racists or xenophobes ourselves, which happens to me every day. So, I don't give up the battlefield in that regard, and other politicians must not. But they can seek out brilliant minds. There are scholars, and I recommend your viewers read, if you really want deep scholarship on this, a brilliant Damascene exile living in Germany. 40 years of his work was publishing on Islamism's political science in Arabic. Many of his books are in German and English, so they're accessible to us. Bassam Tibi, you must read him, Bassamtibi. You must read French philosopher Pascal Bruckner, who's written a brilliant essay on There Is No Such Thing as Islamophobia in the City Journal in New York, and has a book which is called An Imaginary Racism about Islamophobia, just published. Those are great sources of deep thinkers. When we look into Bassam Tibi's work, he has a body of work which proves Muslims dating back to the beginning of the 20th century, almost 100 years from now, have been contesting Islamism and paid the price for it. So this is not a new discussion inside Islam, but Islamism could never really spread its wings until it inoculates and parasitizes democracies. And democracies are not ready. We've not been vaccinated against these ideas. And we're also in a time when most of the public doesn't believe in democracy anymore. Most of them are not voting. Most of them are not thinking, where democracies become an entertainment, which is so disgraceful, but they don't realize what's at stake. And this was an observation made by Salman Rushdie at a commencement address in Emerald, where he warned that he'd lived through a time, as everyone knows, where freedom of speech was truly curtailed. It'll come to me in a moment. Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
He described what happened after the Salman Rushdie affair, as we know who he is, we don't mention his name, he remains silent, but he has pulled a chair up to the table. And of course he's referring to Islamism. Well, that was in 1989, Valentine's Day 1989, when Salman Rushdie was deemed eligible for execution. Now he's not only pulled up the chair to the table, the metaphorical spectre of Islamism, he is chairman of the board. That's what we're experiencing now. We are trying to have these debates in the United States or Canada by the rule book of the Islamists. And I'm saying you don't go by their rule book. You go by the rule book of ideas and democracy. We do not privilege totalitarian organizations or totalitarian ideas. We would not privilege them any more than we would privilege a Nazi party or a communist party. But right now we're treating what is effectively a new kind of Islamofascism the way we might privilege a political party of Zoroastrians. That is absolutely false, and that is undemocratic.
Well, we have to start going by your rule book. I want to thank you very much for your work on this and for your time, Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Thank you.
My privilege.